Hey YouTube, it's Faye, and for today's video, I'm going to be doing front brakes on this 2009 Toyota Tacoma Pre-Runner. Interesting story, I actually did these brakes not that long ago, and the brake pads still have tons of life left on them. But recently, there's been a ton of upgrades added to this truck. As you can see, a lot of weight. We've got a metal smart cap, a rooftop tent. Inside the cap is a ton of kitchen equipment, and recently, Brandon started towing a trailer. So these stock brakes were unfortunately not up to the task, so we're going to be upgrading them today, and I'm going to show you the damage that has actually occurred to the factory pads. They are cracking, kind of scary. So we're upgrading to the PowerStop Z36 truck and tow brake kit. So I'll be showing you those as I unbox them. Also, one thing to note about today's video is it is going to be starting out with voiceovers. So really sorry about that, but I'm going to have my Jan fans running all day long because I'm filming this during the Texas heat wave, and it is 105 right now. I don't know what the real feel is, but I'm in a hot metal building. You can see I've also dimmed the lights to sort of give myself I don't know, maybe like the illusion that it's a little bit cooler in here, but I'm gonna do my best to get the lights in there so you can see what I'm doing and then be really descriptive with my voiceovers. All right, so without further delay, let's get right into it, and I hope you enjoy this video tutorial. Here are the tools you're gonna need to do this job. Starting out with the obvious, we got gloves, we got rags, we got brake parts cleaner. Then we're gonna need a 21mm socket for removing the wheels and a 10mm socket. We've also got a wobbly 17 and a regular 17. You can use these on air tools, you can use these on ratchets. You're definitely gonna want a torque wrench for sure. Then I have this brake pad thickness gauge, not only for measuring the brake pads themselves, but I also use this as a wedge later on, you'll see. And then I use two wrenches in this video. I use an 8mm and a 10mm. These are the ones I use in the video, however, I highly recommend a 10mm line wrench if you have one. I also use these two bolts in the video for removing the rotors. These are M8 by 125 thread pitch, and you can see they're a little bit more than an inch long. Two pocket screwdrivers and a pick. You don't need two, I just always have two in my pocket out of habit, but one of these just for removing some electrical connectors. And then we're gonna need a long flathead screwdriver or a pry bar, or something in between these two is also just fine. We got a little ball peen hammer, we got some pliers, and over here we got a whole bunch of exciting things. We got this red Loctite stick, we've got some brake parts lubricant, we've got some silicone paste, and we've got some anti-seize. Also, zip ties or mechanics wire. And then if you're gonna be replacing the calipers like I do in this video, there's a myriad of different ways you could be bleeding the brakes. There's a whole bunch of different tools you could use. I don't go into brake bleeding in this video, but I will link in the description below a video all about how to bleed your brakes. So this is what you need. Let's get to it. We shall begin by setting the e-brake and getting the front wheels off of the ground, and of course, removing both wheels. With the wheels off, we can see that these front pads have a noticeable crack right through the middle of the friction material. Seriously, what the heck? And I've got to be honest, this is the first time I've seen something like this happen on the high quality OE Toyota pads, but I also deal with mostly stock vehicles, and I'm not a professional overlanding vehicle builder, so I don't really come across fully loaded trucks that often. But let me know in the comments if this has happened to you before. All right, let's get these calipers off. Starting with grabbing a pair of pliers and removing the spring clip that holds the brake line in place against the knuckle, then removing this 10mm bolt to free up this bracket so I can move the caliper out of the way later without bending the hard brake line. Now let's grab our brake pad thickness measuring tool. Darn, 8mm, that is still tons of life, but I'm not gonna risk using a cracked brake pad. This is a good example of why low pad thickness isn't the only reason to change out your brakes. Now let's grab a little pocket screwdriver or a pick and remove these slider pin retaining clips. I recommend that if you don't have a repair manual handy, that you take a photo of how the hardware sits in the caliper before removal, or do the sides one at a time so that you can use the other side for reference when you go back together. Now pull the slide pins out, and we're gonna prep these later, and hook up a brake bleeder bottle or a small hose to the bleeder screw, just to keep you from making a mess. And then we're going to open the bleeder gently with a 10mm wrench, though the new calipers have an 8mm bleeder, so it's good to have both of those sizes on hand if you're doing this upgrade too. Then grab a flathead screwdriver or a small pry bar. We're going to push the pistons back into the calipers using the brake pad and rotor. Since we're replacing both of them today, we're not worried about causing damage to the pads or scratching the rotors at all. Now once I push one side in, I wedge something in between the pad and the rotor on that side so that I can push in the other side. Then I close the bleeder valve. With the pads removed, make note which side has the squealer tab and in what orientation it is sitting if you don't have the repair manual in front of you. Just be sure to put it back in the same orientation. And I'm going to head on this topic a little more in depth when I go to install the new pads, so stay tuned. Next, let's get the speed sensor wire out of the way. I'm using a pocket screwdriver to pry up on the little clip for the wire and then unplugging it from the back of the sensor. Now I'm taking a piece of mechanics wire and tying it around the upper control arm so I have somewhere to hang my caliper once it's loose. And I'm going to remove these two caliper bolts with my wobbly 17mm socket on my Air Impact. And once you have it loose, just tie it up out of the way with mechanics wire, or zip ties totally work too. And make sure that the hard brake lines aren't being bent in any sort of way that could cause damage to them. And also make sure that no weight is on those soft rubber brake hoses. Now it's time to remove the rotor. And if it does not want to come off, hello northern friends, you can always coax it off by putting a couple bolts into these threaded holes. The bolt size is M8 by 1.25. Just make sure to go back and forth between tightening the two evenly as I'm showing here. Don't run one of them just all the way down. It can get sort of stuck and caulked on there. The goal of doing this is to thread the bolts into the rotor so that they push against the hub, thus popping the rotor off towards you. So you want the bolt to have at least an inch of threads on it. All right, going back together, let's see how long I will last with the fan off. Of course, if it's not the fans, it's the cicadas. Welcome to Texas, but we'll see. So you can see my beautiful drilled and slotted rotors, well, Brandon. So huge upgrade here, should dissipate heat a lot better than factory, super stoked. And as you can see, you cannot possibly fail. There's a sticker right on there, front driver's side. Here's the front, this is the driver's side. They're directional. And just in case you might have lost these stickers or something like that, on PowerStop's website, there's actually a guide. It'll show you what direction the slots should be facing for what side of the vehicle. So just in case maybe you buy them used or something like that, you know, you can still figure out what side they should go on. And matching these beautiful rotors, we have these brake pads. These are the Evolution Sport carbon fiber ceramic performance pads. So these should definitely be able to handle the added weight and the towing that Brandon does, hopefully. Ooh, thermal scorched for fast break-in. Sick. Speaking of break-in, on the inside of the box, there is a break-in procedure. So as soon as everything is done and the brakes are bled, I'm gonna go ahead and drive in a specific pattern. And you can see they've got that right there. So we will do that next. Now it comes with 4 pads, obviously, 1 for each side. I already did the other side and I picked out the ones that I wanted for this side. And there's not much of a difference aside from one side will have the little squealer tab. And where I like to put this is on the inside pad, because typically the inside pad will wear a little bit faster. Actually, not really for this style of caliper, which has the pistons on both sides of the brakes, but you know, a lot of times you'll have the floating caliper design where the piston is only on one side and it's really pushing against that inside pad. So sort of just out of, I don't know, habit, I guess, I tend to put the squealer tab on the inside because you want to alert the driver that the brakes are low on the pad that's gonna be lowest the fastest. So yeah, and I also like to put this on the trailing edge or the lower side of the rotor. So this is gonna be the inside pad and this is gonna be my outside pad. So before I install these though, the first step is I'm actually going to clean off the coating on these rotors. Now, according to the instructions, they say to use a mild soap and water. I would highly recommend Ivory Liquid Dish Soap, thanks to my friend Rick. But in this case, I actually don't have running water here, and I don't really feel comfortable that I could get all the soap off, so I'm just gonna go ahead and use brake clean. On PowerStop's website, they also do recommend using a brake parts cleaner for cleaning off your rotors, so I feel confident that this is fine. And I've been doing brakes for like a decade, and I've always used brake parts cleaner, so we're just gonna go ahead and do that. If you've got your own ideas of what is better, washing it with mild soap and water, or brake parts cleaner, feel free to let me know in the comments. This is just what I'm gonna do. So, all right, let's go ahead and do that. And what I like to do is use the box that the rotor came in and place it underneath, whether it's on the floor, oh, my light is dying, or whether it's on my nice lift like this, just so that I collect all the grossness that comes off of it, and then that way I'm not making the shop dirty for no reason. It's interesting, you can see the oils come off of it as I'm cleaning. All right, now that it's clean, I'm gonna very carefully take it back off, and I'm gonna apply a little bit of anti-seize to the hub surface here. This isn't really necessary here in Texas because we really don't have a ton of rust issues, but I don't know, I'm just in the habit of it and I think it's good practice. Also put some on all of our little, whoops, don't fall off there. All of our beautiful new little lug studs. And then also, another weird little thing that I do is I look for where the old, where are they? Oh, right there, okay. I look for where the indentations are, where they had the little threaded holes for popping the rotor off, and I'm gonna line those up. I've got a couple extremely large nuts, and then our new lug nuts. Those are just to get past the little shoulder. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna make sure that the rotor is nice and flush against the hub sealing surface, because I'm now going to install the caliper and the pads. And if this is tilted at all, first of all, it can make it look like that there's run out when there's not. And then also if it's tilted, it's gonna be very hard for me to install the pads. So I am gonna use my impact, but I have it on the low setting. I have it on number 2 here, just to give a quick tighten up. Cool. Those are not going anywhere and look nice and even. All right, now we're gonna install the calipers, but I'm actually not gonna reinstall the factory calipers. There's nothing major wrong with these. They were sticking a little bit. A couple of the pistons were sticking a little bit. I noticed that they're a little bit hard to push in, but Brandon went ahead and balled out anyway. I'm so excited. I can't wait to show you these. I already installed the one on the other side, so I already know what it looks like, and it looks freaking amazing. But these are the Power Stop powder-coated calipers, and they come with all the hardware. You guys, look at this. Freshly rebuilt, new pistons, new seals. Oh my gosh. The bummer is that once they're on the car, we won't be able to see them unless we're underneath the vehicle, because the Armory wheels are completely closed face, which also is another reason why we wanted to go with this kit, why you really needed an upgrade, because the Armory wheels, because they are closed face, they don't really allow for any ventilation on the side of the wheel at all. So having the drilled and slotted rotors, I think, are really gonna help. And I also want to come up with some like creative ducting in the front bumper. Actually, Brandon's going to modify the front bumper. He has a different one that he wants to put on there. And so that'll sort of open up the space for maybe a little bit more airflow. And then I'm also thinking of doing some creative ducting. So anyway, I'm just like so excited to install these. I love installing upgraded parts. So let's get our caliper bolts ready. Now for the caliper bolts, you may have noticed that when I pulled them off, there was a little bit of red on them. That's not paint, it's actually Loctite. So that's like calling it a Band-Aid when it's like, I don't know, an adhesive bandage. Loctite brand, thread locker, but we want the strong thread locker. And I'm a huge fan of these little sticks. They look like, they smell, ooh, if you're a mechanic, you can smell this right now. It's like a glue stick that I used in elementary school, you know, so I don't know, I have a fondness for them in stick form. It's probably more expensive this way, but I don't know. I'm gonna link this in the description below. Now the torque spec for these, by the way, is really weird. It's 91 foot-pounds. Why, Toyota, why? I don't know. So I'm gonna keep the hydraulic system closed for now, so I'm just gonna let this other caliper hang. Actually, what I might do, I'm gonna zip tie it out of the way so it's not in my way. I'm just gonna be careful, of course, not to bend the lines or make anything more difficult for myself here. So I'm gonna set it up here in a way that, yeah, cool. Everything still has plenty of slack. And no, it is not raining in here. That is just me dripping sweat. Super gross. Okay, there we go. You may have also noticed that I actually did change my shirt already because my other one was just completely saturated. And wow, I might have to clean these rotors again because I just dripped sweat onto those. Delicious! All right, so let's get our 2 bolts in the back side of this caliper and get this bolted onto the back of our hub. I love the way these drilled and slotted rotors look. Man, they are so sick. All right, so here are 2 little threaded holes that we're gonna be putting our caliper bolts into. And also it's really easy to tell which caliper goes on which side. Now, obviously, you know Toyota, they over mark everything. They're gonna give you an L and an R, but also more importantly, the bleeder is always gonna go up. So in this case, looking at them, seeing where my bolt holes were, and then seeing where the bleeder was, it's pretty easy to identify which one is gonna go where. Threading these in by hand first, leaving that one loose so I have a little bit of movement on the caliper. And I've got my torque wrench over here. 91 foot-pounds. So bizarre. It's all right. I mean, there is some Toyota engineer that got paid a lot to come up with that number, so we'll trust him, I guess. There's a lot of things I will forgo a torque wrench on, but brakes are not one of them. Cool. Caliper installed. This is excellent. I'm really excited about these brake pads. Probably more excited than I should be since they're not mine. But I love doing upgrades. So we've got these. They are ceramic, carbon fiber. Oh my gosh, they're all the things. Low dust formula, thermal scorch for a fast break-in. And it comes with all the hardware, which is excellent. So these are the PowerStop Evolution Sport carbon fiber ceramic performance pads. Heck yeah, it's good. We need performance. So one thing that I always do that is such a Toyota thing. Oh, and this, like I said, this comes with a hardware packet. I already opened this because I used it. Whoops, get back here. Ooh. I already opened this because I already did the other side just to get ahead of myself. But we've got the new retention spring. We've got new pins. And then the two little pin clips. So we've got everybody present and accounted for. And we've also got the PowerStop brake grease, the silicone brake grease. So I'm gonna use this. Now I do have, of course, my own brake grease as well, but there's more than enough in here. So we're gonna go ahead and use that. Now, because Toyota, there is something that I always do with these pads. You might not have to do that with PowerStop pads, but when I was at the dealership, one thing that I remembered was like there was a lot of noise complaints about brakes, and so I was there during that time when they were adding all the extra anti-squeal shims and all that sort of stuff. I think it was like circa 2012 or 13. But anyway, so now as a result, one of the master techs always would take the backing plate off, and these are like stuck on, so the chance that this would make noise is very, very, very small. But I just can't help it. I'm Toyota mode all the time, and it's like I just have all these weird little things that I do that I just can't give up. So, all right, we're gonna take a little bit of this grease, and we're just gonna put it on the backing plate. And they provide more than enough lube in this little thing, so I'm just gonna lube the pad, between the pad and the shim. And on OE Toyota pads, where they have like multiple squealer shims, or anti-squeal shims, you lube every single layer. It is insanity. All right, so as I pointed out earlier, this is the one that has the little squealer tab on it, which is gonna make noise to alert the driver when the pads are getting low. What a brilliant feature. Sometimes you get new brake pads and they don't actually come with that already pre-installed, so you've got to swap it over. And then there's a lot of people that won't even take the time to swap it over. They just throw away your old brake pads and good luck. Another place that I lube is where the pistons are gonna be. So in this case, I'm just looking at them. You can also lube the pistons themselves, but the problem with that is that there's a chance that you're gonna get some lube on the rotor, and we don't wanna do that. So we can just eyeball it, and I can see like they're pretty much gonna be there. And then lastly, we're gonna have some movement of the pads in and out, just a little bit. So we will lube the top and bottom of the pad where they're going to slide into the caliper. There we go. Top, bottom, front, and inside. Of course, now that your fingers are really greasy, just make sure that you're not, you know, touching the friction material. So, squealer tab down, inside pad. Go in there, little friend. But not too far, because, not too far, because we gotta put the pins in. All right, so we're gonna do that. We're gonna repeat that on the other brake pad. All right, now it's time for our little pins. We got 2 of these, and they're just gonna go through the front and then through the little holes. The brake pads. And at the end of each one of these, there's a little hole. That's where these little pins go through. There we go, beautiful. There's one. Ooh, and this one actually, we've got our new little, there's a proper name for this. I don't know what it is. But this spring does have some sort of fancy Toyota name. I'll have to look it up in the repair manual later. Cool, there we go. And now we're done installing the pads. Wipe off a little excess grease because all this grease is just gonna attract dust, and that can also lead to some noise, and we don't want that. So now the next thing we're gonna do is connect our brake line. I've got my cardboard back underneath, so any brake fluid that does drip down, I'm gonna catch it right away. You wanna make sure that anywhere that brake fluid goes, you wanna clean it up right away because it can destroy paint. It's just very corrosive. Well, I've got this little guy captive and he's not moving. Go ahead, I'm gonna put a rag right here to catch anything. We are gonna drip a little bit, and that's just the way it is, but I've also made sure that I have plenty of brake fluid up in the reservoir, so I'm not gonna run the reservoir dry. All right, we got a little plug here. I'm gonna pull that out. You wanna be really careful when installing this. You wanna get it on nice and straight. You don't wanna mess up the threads on the caliper, obviously, or on the brake line, because this is not a nut you can just replace. You're gonna have to replace the whole line. So I always do go in by hand as much as I can. Of course, as you're losing the brake fluid, it does get a little slippery. So a trick to get it is wobbling the line a little bit. But I just highly recommend, this is such an important step. Just make sure that you are putting this in by hand as far as it'll go until you really just can't do it anymore by hand, and then you just sort of have to give it that final tightness with your 10mm wrench. I would be doing this with a line wrench if I had one here, but I do not. I left them all back at my other shop. I'm sort of all over the place, so. Also, now that that is tight and not leaking any more brake fluid, I'm gonna go ahead and top off my reservoir again and then wipe all the brake fluid off of everything. We don't want it sticking anywhere. No, we do not. All right, my reservoir is all topped off. And so I've still got a few more things to connect back up, but the next thing I'm actually gonna do is take my little 8mm wrench here, and I'm gonna open up this bleeder and start letting the air bubbles come naturally out of the caliper. Obviously this did not come full of brake fluid, so there's a ton of air in the lines right now. And I actually think that the best way to bleed a brake system is actually not with any force. I am gonna be using a vacuum bleeder here. In fact, that's what it's connected up to. You can see the fluid's already coming out. There's my little Capri Tools vacuum bleeder that's attached to, but really I think that gravity bleeding is the best. So while I'm hooking up everything else, I'm just gonna let it naturally gravity bleed a little bit. So be careful though, if you let it too loose, it'll leak a little fluid from the seams there, and I don't wanna drip anymore. Okay, so now we have this bracket left and this clip. And I actually like to do the clip first because sometimes it's hard to move this rigid brake line around. And there are two flat spots on this bracket that line up perfectly with, I have no idea what you'd call that piece, but they line up. So I like to just get that started just like that. So we are good. And now I'll go ahead and line this up. Perfect, there we go. And now that that clip is already started, I'll just take a little hammer and knock it all the way in. Now let's see how our brake fluid is doing. All right, I got my rag. This is actually looking phenomenal. See, there's a little bubble in there. Okay, we still got a little bit more, but that's it. So at this point, I'm going to take the line off and I'm gonna hold it up and let it drip. And oh my gosh, we can see there's only brake fluid coming out. Oftentimes I'll have to wait until some air bubbles come through. And I am gonna, of course, bleed the brakes, but I just wanna do a little pre-gravity bleed. Now, I'm not gonna show how to bleed the brakes in this video. This is just how to install the front pads and rotors and calipers, because I have a whole nother video all about just brake bleeding, whether you have fancy tools, no tools, whether you have a buddy, whether you don't have a buddy. And I'm gonna link that in the description below. It goes really in depth on all the ways you can bleed brakes. So I don't feel like I have to put it here and then you can get just the good stuff. This is all about the brakes, people. So, all right, the next thing we're gonna do is plug in that little speed sensor, and then we are almost done. Then we just gotta put the wheels on and then break the pads in and mate them to the rotors. So, all right, let's get that little speed sensor plugged in. Since I have it off, I'm just gonna put a little dielectric grease or silicone paste in there because Brandon likes to drive through water and stuff. I don't know, he drives through all sorts of crazy stuff. Awesome, so there you have it. Front pads and rotors installed and upgraded. Hopefully this is gonna solve our weird brake pad cracking issue. I'll definitely keep you up to date on that and let you know how it goes. After about an oil change worth of miles, I'll pull the wheels back off and I'll give them a good inspection. So all that's left now is getting those wheels back on. I'm gonna bleed the brakes, and then I'm gonna go out on the road and do the pad break-in procedure. Now, even if you just installed OEM pads and rotors, I totally recommend that you follow this break-in procedure anyway, because it will ensure the best chance of a smooth and noise-free stop. We will be following the instructions from Power Stop, but I honestly feel like these are kind of universal for all brakes. So first you want to make sure that you choose somewhere that does not have a ton of traffic, because the number one thing you want to avoid is stopping with your foot on the brake pedal for prolonged periods of time. And if you do end up coming to a traffic light, be sure to put your vehicle in park and take your foot off the brake until you can drive again. Honestly, even better would be to put your vehicle in neutral and allow it to roll slightly forward or slightly backwards, assuming there's no one behind you or in front of you that far. The hot pads against the hot rotors can actually cause premature warpage on break-in, and we really don't want that. Now, according to Power Stop, they want us to perform 5 moderate to aggressive stops from 40 miles an hour down to 10 miles an hour in rapid succession without letting the brakes cool and without coming to a complete stop. That's followed by another 5 moderate stops, but this time from 35 miles an hour down to 5 miles an hour in rapid succession without letting the brakes cool. Now at this point, you should expect to smell a little resin as the brakes get hot. Now after this is complete, try to drive around for as long as possible without excessively heating the brakes and without coming to a complete stop. They say to try for about 5 minutes at moderate speed. This is the cooling stage. This allows that heated resin in the brake pads to cool and cure. After the brakes have cooled down to regular operating temperature, then go ahead and use the brakes normally. And I normally put on the radio after I smell that burning hot brake smell, and then I wait for 3 songs to play all the way through, and then I'll return back to the shop. Just to be sure, you can also grab an infrared thermometer to measure the temperature of the pads, but that's not super necessary if you just drive normally for long enough without any stop and go traffic. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed this video. Hope that this gave you the confidence that you needed to replace your own brake pads and rotors at home with no real special fancy tools. I mean, aside from the lift, obviously, but you can do this with just a jack in your own driveway if you wanted to make sure you got the e-brake on so the truck doesn't roll around. Super simple, super straightforward, nice, easy brake job. So appreciate you watching, appreciate you supporting my channel, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.